judge said Stephen Port had caused immense distress to the families of his victims because of the wicked and monstrous lies he'd told in court to cover his tracks. When he told him, "You will die in prison," there was applause and cheering from the public gallery.
Hello. Do you think these murders are related? No, they just seem to be drug overdoses and unrelated. Go ahead and close the cases.
What happens when a predator hides behind a screen, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Not in a dark alley, but through a dating app. Stephen Port wasn't some shadowy figure stalking the streets at night. He was a cook, blonde, awkward, with a boyish face that made him seem harmless. Most people who met him described him as odd, socially off, but never dangerous. And yet, this unassuming man used modern dating apps like Grindr and FitLads to lure vulnerable young men into his apartment. Once inside, they were drugged, raped, and killed, often without ever realizing what was happening to them. Stick around as we dissect the mind of a man who turned dating apps into death traps and used GHB as his weapon of choice, leaving behind a trail of bodies that police shockingly failed to connect until it was far too late. Stephen Port was born in Southend-on-Sea, Essex, on February 22nd, 1975. When he was a toddler, his family relocated to Dagenham in East London. His childhood wasn't marked by obvious violence or neglect, but there were red flags. He was unusually quiet, introverted to the point of isolation, and had few friends. Even as a teenager, people around him described him as strange. He didn't seem to emotionally develop past adolescence. He often played with toys well into adulthood and had a flat, affectless way of speaking that made people uncomfortable. He seemed incapable of forming genuine human connections, and that loneliness festered. He left school at 16 with no real direction, eventually enrolling in culinary training and taking work as a chef in London. In his 30s, he finally moved out of his parents' home and got his own place. He lived alone, worked modest shifts at a catering company, and had virtually no close relationships. But his obsession with youth, control, and sex was growing darker by the day. He spent hours online, frequenting dating sites and hookup apps, particularly ones aimed at young gay men. He lied about his age and background, sometimes claiming he was in his 20s, other times inventing fake careers, like being a special needs teacher or a former military officer. He was fascinated with young men who looked teenage, often clean-cut and slim, and he specifically sought out those who were emotionally or financially vulnerable. In his fantasy world, he didn't want equals. He wanted to dominate, to drug, and to possess. The murders began in June 2014. His first known victim was Anthony Walgate, a 23-year-old fashion student who occasionally worked as an escort. Port hired him through a website, arranging for Anthony to visit his flat. But what Anthony didn't know was that Port had already prepared a lethal dose of GHB. At some point during the encounter, Anthony lost consciousness. Port raped him and watched him die. Afterward, instead of calling for help, Port panicked. He dragged Anthony's body outside and left him propped up against a wall near the front entrance, then called emergency services anonymously, pretending to be a passerby who just stumbled upon the scene. When police arrived, Port gave a false name and story, but investigators didn't question it. They accepted the narrative and ruled Anthony's death a drug overdose. This would become a deadly pattern. Stephen Port was later charged, not for murder, but for perverting the course of justice. He served a short prison sentence and was out within months. No one had looked deeper. Despite the odd circumstances, despite the inconsistencies in Port's story, and despite the signs of assault, police closed the case, and the killer walked free. He didn't waste time. 2 months later, in August 2014, Port invited 22-year-old Gabriel Kavari to stay with him. Gabriel was a young Slovakian man, new to London, soft-spoken, artistic, and trusting. Port offered him a place to sleep. Within days, Gabriel was dead, again drugged with GHB, and sexually assaulted while unconscious. Port placed his body in a sitting position against a wall in a nearby churchyard, just a few minutes from his flat. This wasn't about hiding the crime anymore. This was theatrical. Port wanted to watch it unfold from the shadows. 3 weeks later, another young man, Daniel Whitworth, was found dead in the same graveyard. Just 21, Daniel was a chef, bright, kind, and looking for love. Like the others, he had connected with Port online. He too was drugged with GHB and died while unconscious. But Port added a new twist this time. He forged a suicide note and placed it in Daniel's hand. The note claimed that Daniel had accidentally killed Gabriel during a drug-fueled encounter and was now taking his own life out of guilt. The handwriting didn't match Daniel's. The timeline didn't make sense. But the police bought it. No handwriting analysis was done. No DNA was taken from the note. The case was closed. Port had now killed 3 young men in a span of 3 months, all within walking distance of each other, all under nearly identical circumstances. The pattern was obvious. The location was specific. The method, GHB overdoses, sexual assault, and stage scenes, was as clear as any forensic blueprint. But somehow no one in law enforcement made the connection. Officers failed to cross-reference the deaths or interview those who had last seen the victims alive. Some didn't even realize that Port had previously been convicted for lying in connection to the first body. The system had effectively handed him a license to kill. If this case is as disturbing to you as it sounds, take a second to like this video. It really helps the channel out. His 4th victim was Jack Taylor, a 25-year-old forklift driver from Dagenham. Unlike the previous 3, Jack was not a sex worker. He came from a loving, close-knit family and was simply curious about meeting someone new through Grindr. Port met him in September 2015. They chatted. Port seemed odd, but kind. Jack agreed to meet, and just like the others, he ended up in Port's flat. He was drugged with a massive dose of GHB. His body was later found in the same cemetery, dumped in the same style. But Jack's death would be the turning point. His sisters, Donna and Jenny, knew something was wrong. Jack didn't use drugs. He wasn't reckless. They started digging, checking his phone records, scouring his text messages, tracing the Grindr conversation that led him to Port's flat. When they brought their findings to the police, they were dismissed at first, but the sisters refused to back down. They demanded a full investigation, and slowly, the web began to unravel. Police finally searched Port's apartment. What they found was damning. Vials of GHB, syringes, drug paraphernalia, dozens of video files showing unconscious men being sexually assaulted, a laptop containing gruesome searches about drugging and raping men, even messages where he joked about how easy it was to get them knocked out. The level of depravity was staggering. He was arrested and charged with 4 counts of murder, multiple counts of rape and sexual assault, and perverting the course of justice. In total, authorities later identified over a dozen men Port had drugged and abused. His trial began in 2016. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury heard how he used dating apps to hunt for victims, how he filmed himself raping unconscious men, and how he staged scenes to mislead police. Port showed no emotion throughout the trial. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order, meaning he will never be released. But the case didn't end with his conviction. Inquests into the 4 deaths revealed staggering police incompetence. Officers had ignored family concerns, failed to link the murders, and missed critical forensic evidence. The fake suicide note never analyzed. The repeat location of the deaths overlooked. Surveillance footage showing Port walking with the victims ignored. It raised the terrifying question, was this just negligence or something deeper? Apathy toward crimes against gay men. Stephen Port is now held at HM Prison Belmarsh, one of the UK's most high-security prisons. He rarely speaks. He's never confessed to the full scope of his crimes. And many believe there are more victims, men who never came forward or whose deaths were never investigated. His story is a chilling reminder that in the digital age, predators no longer have to lurk in dark alleys. They wait for you to swipe right. What do you think allowed Port to go undetected for so long? Was it systemic bias, a lack of care, or something worse? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this deep dive compelling, subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories.